right? So I want to share perspective from how did some of the best practices that we did at C to be able to grow from a grassroots initiative into a nonprofit, right? And now into a registered charity. So I'm going to use some of those best practices, but also some of the things that I just wish someone had told me and told me in COPE when we were kind of starting this from the grounds up. So happy to kind of share from both of those lenses. Next slide. So when you think about why we're even talking about this and why this is important, think about it from the governance lens. And think about it from the perspective of good governance equal growth, right? That's where you're trying to get to, right? What I think what we've been really, really good at is the programmatic end of things, right? And don't get me wrong, I love to be in the front line serving, love to be developing the programming end of things. But then we have to think about if I really want this program to stay and for it to have longevity, sustainability into community, I got to think governance. I got to think, how do I make sure that I have my contracts in place, I'm in compliance, I'm having my eyes on my finances. And oftentimes when we're a smaller kind of nonprofit or a smaller program, we don't have all those infrastructures in place. And that's where partnerships and trusteeships comes into play to kind of bridge the gaps that you might have in your organization, right? So when you're thinking about trusteeship and partnerships, it's so important because you're trying to get to a place of good governance and therefore growth. Next slide. So keep that in mind as the context. The reason why all of this is important, though, is kind of linked to your credibility. But how do you get to credibility to therefore be able to attract kind of bigger funding pools? Well, you kind of have to pay attention to, are you accountable in your programming? Are you following compliance? What does your impact say? And how do you tell that story of impact? And you're looking also internally to say, what are we learning here? And how do we include that into a plan? All of that works together to build your credibility, to build your governance, and therefore impact your growth. Next slide. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use in order to facilitate governance. If you press enter, the other element will come up. Shahina, thank you. So some of the tools that we use to be able to facilitate this is contracts and agreements. The two that I have engaged more often with in my work over the time, 17 plus years, is an MOU, so a Memorandum of Understanding, and an LOU, a Letter of Understanding. And we want to talk a little bit about how I've seen it come into play in a practical sense, because we can talk about theory, but also like, let's bring it down to the ground as to how do we see it function in our day-to-day operations. Next slide. Okay, and yeah, thanks. So when we think about an LOU and MOU, both of them are agreements. It's tying the two parties or three parties or whomever is in the partnership into kind of a formalized agreement that, yes, we have agreed that we're going to work together to produce XYZ program, XYZ project, right? So it's an agreement. What the differences come into play is based on the funder context. So for example, in practical terms, what I've seen play out at sea, if it's a foundation, they tend to use a letter of understanding. It's a shorter document. It stipulates how each party will behave in terms of the agreement, the partnership. So for example, the funder agrees or the foundation agrees to donate or invest XYZ dollars or XYZ expertise or XYZ technology into X program, into our tech program. And the expectation is C will work to deliver the program, will work within the confines of the boundaries of the budget, etc. Right? So all of that will be stipulated in an LOU. But an MOU is a lot more of a comprehensive document. I find in practical terms or in practical ways, an MOU comes into play when the program or the project is a lot more comprehensive. And there is a need to kind of outline several terms of agreement, right? Example, terms of agreement could mean what are the reporting agreements? What is the way that we're going to deal with finance? What are the ways that we're going to deal with property or licensed material, right? So an MOU will kind of stipulate those in a very comprehensive way. Sometimes though, the more complex, again, the program partnership is, it might include both documents. For example, if the partnership is over 3 years, over several years, it might begin with, okay, we understand in terms of an LOU that we're going to work together. And in an MOU, we're going to outline how we're going to work together, what the expectations are, what the outcomes are, what the budget is, etc. Next slide. Here's where I added some do's and don'ts for this because I wish we knew this upfront when we were starting C. Next slide. So I would say some do's. Please read the full LOU or MOU document. Have somebody on your team. If that's not what you're into, no problem, but have somebody on your team. And if you can't afford to have a lawyer, have somebody on your team who's going to take the time to kind of look through your documents. Sometimes we get so excited and want to do the work and we're very eager, and sometimes it's maybe our first funding that we've received and we just want to kind of go, and we don't take the time to look through, okay, this is how the relationship is going to play out if something, particularly if something goes wrong. So read the full MOU or LOU document. And oftentimes I think what gets us in the end is not paying attention to reporting. So when you read your MOU and your LOUs, pay attention to the reporting requirements because that helps to build your credibility, right? How you manage resources. Next slide. And oftentimes, what is often missing, and now we kind of ask for when we get into any agreements, is some best practices around finances. Like, for example, not only how much funding is supposed to be kind of dispersed in the agreement, but how will we address reporting back, like reconciling? Is it just one organization taking the lead versus another? Because these are kind of the hiccups that we don't stipulate in our agreements, that in practical ways kind of come back to be a little bit disruptive, right? So you want to stipulate those type of things. Next slide. And never ever sign an agreement if there's a term in there that you don't understand, because what you don't know you cannot prepare for, is how we've kind of treated the matter. So if there's a term in there, right, around insurance or indemnification or something like that, take the time to do your due diligence before you sign. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about service agreements, because I think they come up in partnerships and trusteeships a lot. So yes, you have an LOU or an MOU. That's an agreement between perhaps you and a funder, perhaps, or a program partner. But then there's this other layer of agreements that come into play, and this is where service agreements kind of live. Next slide. So service agreement is a contract or an agreement between yourself or your organization and a vendor or another institution who's going to deliver a service for you. That could look like that could look like a vendor agreement. So it could look like, okay, we're going to rent your space for XYZ amount of time. That's a service agreement. It could look like a trustee agreement, depending on how comprehensive it is. Sometimes it also looks like your operations agreement. So if you're going to be kind of contracting a larger organization to handle your back end, right? So service agreements could be very basic, from a vendor agreement to more complex projects. But I think we should pay attention to sometimes the smaller agreements, the smaller contracts, we tend to be really quick about because it's like, okay, yeah, 500, do this really graphic thing, okay. And then we don't get the work done. And it becomes a concern to keep going back, right? So what I think for me has been what I would have done differently building C, I would have really worked to put some of those template contracts together from the beginning versus after when I'm trying to solve a problem. Does that make sense? So do that due diligence to kind of build a portfolio, a template suite that you can work from. Next slide. So I want to talk just a little bit about trusteeship, but I know that you go a little bit further. But just some things that I've noticed that I wish someone would have like tapped me on the shoulder and shared with me. Next slide. For myself, if there's a trusteeship agreement, I'm really looking for it to have these three kind of general themes in there. I'm looking for some of the operating terms, right? So what are we doing? Who's involved here? Who are the parties? What are we doing? And how do we plan to do it? And if there's a change, how are we going to deal with that change? So some of those practical terms could look like making sure that there is a party description. The parties involved are XYZ. Make sure that there's a program description. Oh, we're working on this particular program, a technology program. It's these two agencies involved, and here's what they're each respectively responsible for. Like now I look for those things because we've learned the lessons the hard way, right? And I look for, what does it say about finances? I'm so sorry, they're also doing construction in my building. So if you're hearing that, apologies. But I also look for like, what are the terms around finances? Do we have an understanding of how much money are we being asked to kind of be in partnership around? How is it going to be dispersed? When is it going to be dispersed? How are we doing reporting? Like if I don't see those things, I begin, the little red flag starts to go up, right? Because again, I don't want to learn the lesson the hard way 3 and 4 times. I want to, take the lessons and learn and plan again. And I also look for if there's something around evaluation, do we need to both have a say into reporting, or am I just reporting on programming? I want those things to be kind of very clear for myself in a trusteeship kind of agreement. And also in how we're at C now trying to support developing an ecosystem of Black social services organizations. And we're beginning to trustee a lot more. And these are things that we're asking our folks to kind of consider in our community of practice. Next slide. Just also want to just point out, even though it's the obvious, but just want to point out that any trusteeship partnership is equally or mutually, should be mutually beneficial and supportive for the trustee organization, right? Oftentimes what we see is not the full level of capacity building supports that's needed, right? Or that's being sought after. So because of that, I mean, there's a few things that I want folks to pay attention to. Next slide. get really clear for yourself. Like, think about your organization. If you're entering into a trusteeship relationship, get really clear as to what are we exactly trying to learn right now that we need to look for or look to mentorship for in this organization. If it was my top two things, what would it really be? So that I can kind of watch, learn, ask questions, and begin to bring that kind of knowledge back into kind of my organization. Pinpoint the supports that you need. I wish we had learned that. We just assumed that a trustee relationship, we just assumed like, of course, you know what we need, you know? Of course, you've been operating for XYZ, of course, but that's not always the case. So it's really important that you begin to articulate that. And as yourself, as the grantee or the growing organization, really focus on your deliverables, trying to do that well while learning how to set up the operations, while trying to learn how to set up the capacity building support, the infrastructure, right? Because I think all of that, that was the best practice we took, and it really is starting to work out and pay out for us now. Next slide. And just to keep in mind that trustee relationships come with some compensation. And compensation usually means that there's an expectation of value to be brought into that relationship, right? So value could look like, hey, I need support with administrative duties, or hey, what I really need right now is financial processing and disbursement, or what I really need is mentorship, or protection against mitigating risk, legal risk, reputational risk, right? So we know that a trusteeship relationship is mutually beneficial, around, supposed to be around capacity or supporting capacity building, and it comes at a cost, which means that there's a value attached, but get really clear about what the value that you're looking for. Next slide. And the last thing I will say about a trusteeship or a partnership relationship is, make sure that there's a clause around conflict resolution or termination. Because the reality is, it's almost like, it's almost like you're dating in some sense. And not every relationship work out, right? The values might not line up, the way in which operations flow might not line up. And so instead of us being kind of just maybe wishful, or perhaps not thinking about that from the start, get really clear about, okay, if there's a conflict, if it's not working, how are we going to resolve? Are we going to meet? Who's going to meet? Is it frontline? Is it management? Kind of stipulate those things. In addition to, let's say we have tried, how then do we exit the relationship in a way that is not disruptive to both organization, and that is what we would hope that we practice in community building, which is, equitable, effective, mutually respectful. Next slide. And just a note about the terms of reference, which I will admit, oh my goodness, so confused me on a practical sense when I came into the sector. So I'm hoping to demystify just a tiny bit if I could. Next slide. So when you hear about terms of reference, enter, it really is kind of giving you a framework of how to think about a particular project, or think about a particular partnership or agreement, right? And the terms of which make up that partnership or make up that agreement. Think about it in that way. When you're thinking about it in respect to trusteeship, I think about it in terms of the actual terms that outline your contract, the actual terms of your agreement. And like I said prior, there are a few areas that if I don't see, I start to raise my red flag. So if I don't see something that outlines who's involved in this partnership, what are we here doing? What is the context of our partnership? Is it a program? Is it a curriculum? Why are we here operating together? If I'm not seeing some of those operational things, then I begin to red flag. If I don't see terms around finances, how we're going to work together around disbursement, times of disbursement, reconciliation, um, even preparing for audit. If I don't see those things, then red flag, you know? And finally around like evaluation of some kind, because we're in this partnership relationship because at some point we have to say what we did, right? So if there is nothing around, how are you going to support around evaluation, i.e. reporting, then it begs for you to kind of outline, here's what then I would need, my organization would need. Next slide. I wanted to just uh, give a little tip around terms of reference that are related to just your board, because sometimes you're small, but start dreaming. Why not? Right? So start thinking about your board term of reference, right? You're growing something that's probably near and dear to your heart. There's a reason why you're doing this work, right? And eventually it's something that you're going to hand off to community. So what would you like that to look like? What kind of board, right? How would you want it to function? Big board, small board, what do we do together? Just something that I kind of like to leave with, social innovators. Next slide. Okay. So I was one of those presenters who asked to hold the questions because I knew I wasn't going to be here for the full length of the presentation. But any questions about any element of what I have shared?
Shereen, it's Shahina. I've received some messages from some of today's participants who are thinking about incorporating as a not-for-profit and potentially even down the road becoming a charitable organization. So I guess one question that would be great to have some more information about: when did CEE, evolve from being a grassroots group into an organization? Sort of how many years did that take? What did that look like?
So we launched as a program in 2012. So 2012, 13, 14, 15. So it took us 5 years to get registered as a nonprofit. And we were in trusteeship, a trusteeship relationship during that time that we learned how to ask as we grew. We learned how to ask for what we needed in terms of building leadership capacity. Does that make sense? So it took us about 5 years to get to a nonprofit, and then 2 years to work towards a charity status. Here's the thing, though, that I think oftentimes messes us up. During the time that we were in trusteeship in our trusteeship relationship, we did audit throughout all those years. We didn't wait until we registered as a nonprofit to do our audits, right? So we were still trying to practice governance. We made mistakes. We did all of that. Don't get me wrong, right? So we made our mistakes, but we made our mistakes when we were in a trusteeship relationship where the impact wasn't necessarily so heartfelt. You know what I mean? Like we learned little by we learned when we had smaller budgets, and we learned when the impact wouldn't have been so great, right? So if you're not doing your audits, even though you might be a program or not yet a registered nonprofit, please begin to try to practice that because I think it helped us.
Those are really great tips. Thank you for sharing that. There is a question in the chat, and I'd encourage others, if you want to raise your hand or verbally share your questions, that would be great. But there is one in the chat asking you, Shereen, what is the ultimate goal of your organization? How has it helped Black professionals so far?
So our ultimate goal is economic and social development, so supporting that. Ideally, in practical terms, we want to help Black youth to be able to live a good quality of life for themselves and their families and be able to contribute to Canadian society. So when we think about the kind of the vision and the mission, that's it. The pathway that we're taking is career workforce development, but in a very holistic way. So we're not just interested in kind of training brains and hands, like who's the whole person, right? Because we can teach you how to do this thing. You might go into the job and not necessarily something might trigger you and you've lost the job or something has happened, right? So who are you as a whole person and how do we support you as a whole person? I think one of the impacts that we've had working as somebody who, uh, in a lot of ways, C was designed. I mean, C, the catalyst for C was gun violence, and as a survivor, and my co-founders and activists in that space. If you're talking about that core issue of gun violence, have we done enough? Have we made an impact? I don't know. That's questionable. We question that. I question that. But in terms of supporting youth in this way of holistic being, I would say, yeah, we've had an impact. What our members have said historically uh, demonstrates that. You can talk about our numbers and our retention, and that's there. But if that's not there without our members having lived and expressed lived change, then, I think it would be hollow change. So for me, I go from what our members say versus, things like retention and what they've said it's made a change. And we've had members who have been with us since 2012 who still engage. So I think that's demonstrative of that. It's a long-winded answer.
But a powerful one. Thank you for sharing that personal experience. And yeah, it is really important to stay rooted in the work, and that's very connected to the personal. So thank you for sharing that. There's a question from Anna. Shereen, what do you mean by audit? Just reporting to the funder or yearly report for the entire organization?
Oh, I'm speaking specifically to your financial audit, although I will say reporting is a part of that, right? So I'm talking about your financial audits.
Mhm. Okay, perfect. Yes. So, in case anyone's not aware, so your financial audit would be an external company would sort of come in and review all of your financials, your budgets, your income, your expenses, make sure everything looks okay, and sort of give you a stamp of approval on this document called an audit. So that's different than your report to the funder or organizational reports. We have a comment from Leah. How large of a grassroots group were you in that first 5 years? Sorry, question. How large of a grassroots group were you in the first 5 years? Did you quote unquote lose anything when you became an incorporated nonprofit group? How large or small is your board at the moment and your reason for the number of members on your board? What's the size of your paid staff and volunteers at the moment? Wow, good questions.
Right. You might have to remind me of a few
Yeah.
more as they go down the line. But how large were we? Oh my God, Leah. At one point it was just me and Kofi. You hear me? Like at one point it was just us two, just battling to stay afloat. So it really fluctuated. But it never kind of went past five. We would like fluctuate like five core staff. But like I said, sometimes it went down to just Kofi and I because, you learn, you shape, you pivot, your ability to attract funding, all of those things kind of come into play.
Thank you. Yes, that's grassroots. Did you quote unquote lose anything when you became an incorporated nonprofit group?
Not when we became a nonprofit. I think as you grow, there are, not that you lose things, there are things that definitely change. And I think sometimes what can limit us is if we don't know how to pivot and adapt during the periods that we do need to change, because we think, oh, well, we've always done it this way and this was our kind of, sweet sauce here and this is what worked. But maybe the context have changed and now you need to kind of pivot. So I don't think of it through the lens of things that I've lost, but things that have had to change. Definitely, we lost staffing that was something that changed as we grew, right? People came in and out. And so you have to kind of prepare yourself to be able to adapt also to that.
Thank you for that. How large or small is your board at the moment? And what is your reason for choosing a certain number of board members on your board?
Okay. So we choose board members according to a skill matrix that we need in the organization. So it's never on the basis of like, oh, we just need like 10 like random people. No, we need 10 people, and it needs to be comprised of somebody who understands finances really well. So if, because we need a treasurer on the board, we need a lawyer. We need somebody who understands programming. We need educators. So it's really based on the skill matrix that we think we need in the organization. So take time to do that. And our board right now, I think we're up to 10 people or 11, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a fairly larger size board, but we've also grown significantly. So we now need other expertise or added expertise to the board. So, that's what kind of drove that decision to increase the board size.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I believe the minimum is 3 board members. But you would outline in your bylaws what your maximum number of board members are, but the minimum is definitely 3. What is the size of your paid staff and volunteers at the moment?
So I think and I say I think because we're constantly hiring. We've had several like jobs out. I think we're up to 31 paid staff, grew significantly over the last 3 years, I would say. And volunteers fluctuate. It depends on our fiscal year, but we also try to think strategically about our volunteers because we're not at the point where we can kind of retain a large quantity of volunteers. So we think of it strategically through some of the partnerships that we have at the table. So for example, if it's a corporate partnership, we think about, is there an opportunity to do a day of volunteering at sea? That's how we approach volunteering versus we have 10 open roles for volunteers and we're just accepting folks. We have to be a little bit more strategic and targeted because of the capacity of our staff team, right? So I would also offer that. Don't necessarily think that the one size model of how you've seen volunteers work in organization needs to be how it applies to kind of your program and what you're doing.
Great, thank you. We've got 2, and Leah thanks you for the answers and congratulates you on your transition and success. So we've got 2 more questions and then we will have to move forward to stay on time. One is, you've already answered this a bit, but what are some things we can do to prepare to enter into a trusteeship even before we contact a potential partner?
Okay, so I would say get clear about the exact support that you need right now as you're growing, right? So if it's on your team, think about I always like to say, think about your team like yin and yang. Like you can't build a team with folks who have the same skill set as you, who think the same way. You got to bring on complementary skills. Complementary, you know what I mean? So think about it from that lens. Like, what do you have on your team that's really, really working right now? And what's not really working? Build your partnership around the what's not working piece. That's what you should be asking for. I really don't understand finances. I really need help with here in my trusteeship agreement. Can I build in, like we did, can I build in an hour once a month where I meet with the person who's handling my accounts, right? And we were able to have that very direct one-to-one meeting, and I can ask those specific questions and build my knowledge, build my capacity, right? So think about it from that lens.
Thanks, Shereen, and thank you, Fiorella. That was a really good question. The next question is, what 3 skills are needed when working in nonprofit that weren't needed as a grassroots? Interesting.
Strategic leadership. You need a leadership team that can think strategically. And it has to be a leadership team that works really well together, because managing change and transition, it gets really bumpy. Conflict comes into play, just real talk, all of that comes into play. So if there isn't, what really worked for us is that we really focused on team, and we really focused on relationships at the time that we were transitioning from a program into a nonprofit. So the entire team got an opportunity to be a part of that transition, to say how they thought it should look, feel. And that was really, really important, versus it coming down from, oh yeah, we're doing this thing and here's how we're gonna do it. So approach becomes kind of really important, but leadership. And if you don't have, if that's not a capacity that you have, or that you're kind of struggling with, this is where mentorship comes in, or sponsorship comes in. Is there somebody who's doing it in a way that you appreciate, that you can look towards, and ask for support? But for me, it's the leadership piece. Focus there. Because I mean, if you're growing, the fact that you're growing, to me, says that you've done something really well at the programmatic end, right? You figured out the sauce there, the winning sauce there. Your ability to grow or not grow from that point becomes around leadership and strategy, and how well you can work together as a team.
Thank you so much. That was a really great answer. Before we let you go, Shereen, I did receive a request for a sample memorandum of understanding. Is there one that you could potentially share with me, a template or a blank that I can share with others today?
Yeah, you know what? I can email you one. I'll just have to kind of detract some stuff, but I can send you one.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's give a big thanks to Shereen. She's not able to stay for the rest of the session, but we really appreciate having you here with us today. The information you shared was incredible and really invaluable and so useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me, and, keep up the good work, and also make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, right? I'll leave folks with that. Thanks for having me, Shahina. We'll talk. Thanks.
For
Thanks,
sure. Thank you. Great. It is now my pleasure to pass this over to our next amazing presenter, Natalie Johnson, the manager of the Trustee Hub at the Neighbourhood Group. She's going to talk to us all about trusteeship and shared platforms.
Super, thank you very much. And I'm just trying to get this to just do the slide. Perfect. All right, welcome everybody. My name's Natalie Johnson. I work with the Neighbourhood Group on the Trustee Hub project. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of the Ontario Nonprofit Network. I put organization by mistake. So what is shared platform? So we've been talking a bit about that, and it's really an opportunity for a young organization to be hosted and get the organizations host and provide a legal home for projects or initiatives for unincorporated groups. And you'll hear it, you've heard it called trusteeships, organizational mentor-mentee, incubators, all sorts of names, but really it's the same idea as connecting with folks and being able to support and have that mutual benefit for both the trustee and the organization. So what does it do? And some of what I'm going to be talking about was touched upon by Shereen, and I won't go too deep into it if it's already been covered, but for those who have come on after, I'll provide some more information. What does a shared platform do? So it really provides the administrative support and oversight. So they can support you with the policies and procedures, you'd fall under theirs, And as part of your mentorship process, you're also going to get to help develop your own for your organization. They manage your finances, the contracts, and your HR. You can become on their payroll. And so through that, their payroll system supports your staff. Insurance, you're covered under their insurance, and any legal and financial responsibilities for the activities of the project. Other components that different shared platforms also provide is mentorship. So similar to what Shereen was saying, was really about being able to get that added support for your growing organization. So really, it's really important to really think about where are the areas that you need that growth and development. If you're looking at long-term being your own registered charity and being incorporated and all of that, think about the things that you're going to need for that and kind of work your way back and look at, okay, so how can I utilize the support in the mentorship to gain those pieces? So you have access to software, digital tools. So that could be, whether it be Zoom accounts or additional software, community networks and resources, depending on the projects that you're doing. If the organization that you're working with that's trusteeing you runs similar programs, then a lot of the resources and networks you will have access to, and shared spaces. So sometimes you might need a space to run your program or an activity, and you can utilize the space that the organization has or tap into additional spaces that they have access to that you can then get. When you're looking at being in this relationship, again, it has to be there has to be mutual benefits, right? So for the organization that's going to be trusteeing groups, you want the community impact. So it gives you an opportunity to get really connected to community and provide the supports through the trustee group to support organizations as well as the community itself. Access to existing administrative systems and expertise. Like I said, you can connect with programs that are similar to the ones that you're doing, gaining that additional support, and also being able to provide some new knowledge as well. Access to additional supports offered by the shared platform and connecting those components. You want to stay away from, if you're looking for a trustee, you want to stay away from things where you think, oh, it's going to automatically save me money, or you're just doing it because there's this funding opportunity that you want to have an opportunity to get, or some sort sense of obligation. It's really about the relationship, and the best relationships are ones that are more authentic and really look at what are the values and mission of the group. How does it align with the larger organization? What are the benefits that can come from both sides? And how best do we support the community? Is a shared platform a fit, right? So we talked about fit with Shereen. Some of the things you really want to take into consideration: knowing what you want, knowing what you're there for, what the goals you want to reach, and being clear about your purpose. So will being part of the shared platform help you reach those goals? Your needs, what do you need from the relationship with the shared platform to be successful? Really identify what those are. Is it finance capacity? Is it governance? Do you need to learn what it takes to have a board? What's the board's responsibility? And those components as well. And are you ready to work in this way? Is this something that looks like it's going to be of benefit to you? The shared platform resource guide that the Ontario Nonprofit Network has put together and will be sharing with folks in the coming weeks, has a lot of these tools and a lot of the questions that you want to think about, templates. It's a wealth of resources. So what's included, what definition of what the shared platform is, are you ready, how to assess whether you're ready to be in this relationship, how to select and find out if it's a good fit, good shared platform practices, information for all the different levels, for the board of directors or managers and the staff, communicating and dealing with conflict, because as was said before, it's a relationship and not all relationships work well. There's always difference of opinions, and really talking about what are we going to do when those things arise. When conflict arises, how are we going to engage in that dialogue? Who do you go to? If it's the person that you're working directly with, is there somebody above that person or that you can go to if you're having some challenges? Evaluating the relationship. So making sure that that's part of your kind of annual process, where you sit down and really talk about, here are the needs that I had coming into this relationship. Here's where you met those needs. Here's where it fell short a bit. How can we get back on track for the next year or the next grant that we're receiving? And how to end a relationship when it's necessary. Sometimes it'll be a mutual understanding. Sometimes it'll just be, one-sided, and being able to have those real conversations around termination of that relationship and kind of what's next. So how to support moving forward. And so successful shared platforms have so much to do with relationships and trust. Really, you're having this relationship, you want to get the most out of it. You want it to be a shared relationship of power, really, and decision making and taking risks together. It's an opportunity to understand the vision, values, expectations, and responsibilities to ensure that that's a real positive experience for both parties. Some of the things you want to look at when it comes to deciding on whether it's a good fit are mission alignment, right? Is your mission as the organization similar to theirs? The legal status. What are the details of the shared platform's nonprofit status? Are they a registered charity? Find out how they might impact, how that might impact the funds that you can apply for. Because depending on who you're applying to, if you're now housed underneath that organization and you're only allowed to submit one application from an organization, it might impact how the different opportunities that you're able to go with. So that's something that you want to really think about too, and have those kind of conversations. Size and budget. Does the shared platform have projects of your size and budget? Are there requirements around size and budget? Are they familiar with working with groups like yours? Administration and operation. A shared platform will need to sign all of your grants and contracts. So who's in charge of these things? Who will be working with you? Do you have a direct contact for those individuals, so that, if something comes up and you need to get a signature, how do you go about doing that? Is there a particular process that you have to follow? So these are all things that you want to check on as well. Communications and digital infrastructure and IT. How will the shared platform communicate with staff? Are there online systems that they might use? Will it be monthly meetings? Will it be well, now a lot of things are virtual, or do they need to meet in person for whichever reasons? Funders, what is the process for communicating with funders? Any opportunities or barriers to raising funds as part of the shared platform? So can you have donations? Can you do, different marketing or different fundraising activities? How does that align with the fundraising that the organization does? These are also things that you want to consider. The cost, how much does it cost to be part of the shared platform? What does that cost include? And are there additional fees? So these are all things that you want to think about. And then the agreements, we talked a bit about agreements. Is there a shared platform agreement with clear roles and responsibilities? Are there templates that are used? Learning and mentorship, what skills or supports would help your project grow? Is the shared platform able to provide this type of support? What is the shared platform hoping to learn from your project, right? So it's not always just about the trustee learning from the shared platform, but vice versa, right? Sometimes they can be, instrumental in helping change and shift thinking for different upcoming projects within the organization as well. Learning and mentorship is really important, and being able to share those components and additional offerings are the other project's needs. Is this something the shared platform can offer? So whether it be shared spaces, access to photocopiers, or now, can they borrow laptops for programming? All that sort of stuff could be things that you want to think of if an organization is a good fit. So here are just some sample questions that you can ask. So why are you interested in mentoring or working with groups like ours? What do you need from us to make this partnership positive and productive? Can you share what you've learned from past experiences working with other groups? All of these questions will also be in the guide, so you don't have to worry about trying to write them all down now. All of the information that I'm providing today will also be in the guide as well. What type of supports your organization offer as we implement our project ideas? And that's important, because you want to know that you're going to have the support all the way through what your project's doing, and all the needs that you have will be met through that. Would you be able to provide us with feedback as we deliver our project? Would you be open to creating a mechanism to share lessons learned and for problem solving as we enter into the partnership? How frequently would you like to meet and have check-ins? What process do you use for administering funds, and what fund reconciliation process look like? So all of these are really good questions to ask. We had talked a little bit about agreements, and really the important piece around agreements, it really outlines the roles and responsibilities that both parties will have, as well as the board of directors, management, staff, and the project leadership. And it gives you some clear understandings around who's going to do what, when things are going to be submitted, how the flow of money is going to go, all of those things, so that later on, as your program goes through, you have an understanding of those things as well. So some of the key ingredients: your goals, your mission and your values, the roles and responsibilities, the activities, your budget, how funds are going to be used and managed, any project costs allocated to the shared platform, such as the percentage of the revenue or administration fees or fees for insurance or anything like that. The other piece that you really want to think about is the ownership of project assets and work products and intellectual property. Will that be owned by the trustee organization, or will that still remain as your intellectual property. And sometimes those pieces are taken care of within the contracts with funders. So if they fund for computers or what have you, it may be allocated to that project. And then you may have to leave it with the organization after that project's done. But those are some of the pieces that you want to make sure that are in there as well. And then the project termination process as well. And so when you're reviewing, when you're meeting with the groups, when both parties are meeting, you want to really take time to review your agreement, identify the main points of contact, know what their work schedules are, because sometimes the work schedule of the trustee organization of the shared platform is different from the organization's work hours. So how do you get in contact with somebody outside of that time if you need anything? So making sure that you have those things as well. Set realistic goals, identify your check-ins and your time, understand your finances and project reporting. Who has to submit reports? Does it need to be signed off? Who's writing those reports? All of those components need to be discussed and identified in your agreement. Develop a schedule for releasing the funds. When do invoices need to be submitted? When does payroll happen? All of those mechanisms are important in problem solving and giving and receiving feedback, and developing a process for managing and reconciling funds. So like I said, all of this information is going to be provided under the nonprofit resources on the Ontario Nonprofit Network website. And I hope that answered a lot of questions, but I'm open to more.
Amazing. Thank you, Natalie.
No
That
problem.
was an incredible wealth of information that was so useful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I thought it was really interesting also how you mentioned the property, because I've actually seen that happen to a group before where they entered into a trusteeship, and after the partnership ended, they were not able to have ownership of the materials they created with that grant, because technically they were owned by the trustee organization. So that's definitely something to kind of look into. If you're producing something with a grant, who owns it at the end of the day? Same with equipment. Yeah, so some really, really great considerations and things to think about for sure. Does anyone have any questions for Natalie? You can feel free to say them verbally. If you want to raise your hand, we can call out your name to say them verbally. You can share your questions in the chat, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Oh, looks like we've got a question from Fiorella. Go ahead.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for this. It's so helpful. I'll say this verbally because I'm not sure how to articulate it really, so bear with me. I think this might be different depending on every partner, but I'm wondering, like, when you're receiving sponsorship or funding from whatever company or something, how is that presented to them in like legally, financially, tax wise? I'm just, I guess, a little bit confused of how that happens, because technically the funding goes to your partner, but yeah, I'm having trouble articulating this question.
So are you asking from the shared platform perspective?
Yes. So from, no, sorry. So if somebody, let's say, I don't know, the Coca-Cola company wants to give us money,
Okay.
to them, like, are they seeing like they're giving the money directly to the grassroots organization, or it goes legally through, like the donation goes through our partner?
Yeah, so it depends on how the financial department is set up for the trustee, for the shared platform that you're working with. For us, we let our trustee group, because the neighborhood group also trustees organizations, and we let them know who we are and how that relationship works. And so oftentimes when there's a letter of understanding or what have you, our name's on it and our financial pieces are attached, so that they know that when they're sending the money for that group, it comes through us, but it's sent to them. So then on our back end, we have different accounts set up on that will house the money for that particular organization. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I think, like I said at the beginning, it's probably depending on every partner, but yeah, that clarifies. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that question. Are there any other questions? I'm checking out the chat here. Positive feedback. Here we go, Ali from Outreach.
You had mentioned, I think earlier in the presentation, about not just joining on to a trustee partnership for a specific grant or something like that. Can you explain why you don't recommend that?
Because sometimes folks may rush into just getting a trustee because they know that they have this grant that they want to apply to, but haven't spent the time to get to know that trustee and know if their mission aligns and all of those components. And it's just I'm putting in this grant right now. It asks for a trustee. There's a list, maybe I select this one and I'm going to call them and say, hey, can you trustee me? And then just go that route. It's really about making sure that there is connection and that you're going to get the support that you need.
Okay, so it's less about, okay, so it's more about just the relationship building and being really conscientious about that, and less about, because Outreach, who I work for, we're a funder, and some of our groups seek a trustee just specifically for the project they run with the funds they get from us. So I was just seeing if it was more like an ongoing versus project relationship, or that's perfect.
Oh, no, you can have one grant or one project with a trustee. That statement was really more about the relationship and not having like a knee-jerk reaction to just picking any trustee, but you really want to make sure that it's aligned and you are going to get the support that you need.
Yep, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Ali. Oh, we've got a question from Abdul. Go ahead.
Oh, you're on mute. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Abdul, you're muted. I just sent you a request to.
Sorry that, yeah. My question is that, are any trustees or member of board of directors can get remuneration in lieu of service of any partnership projects or individual projects?
Say that again.
Are any trustee or member of board of director of an organization can get remuneration in lieu of service, like consultation or advice?
I'm not sure I understand the question. If a organization wants to just pay for just the support and not necessarily be trusteed by the organization, is that what you're asking?
I am asking that trustees are supporting the organization by providing advice and all other technical issues, or even the member of a board of director also providing support or advice or consultation for any projects. Are they allowed to get remuneration or salary from projects?
No. So the board for us, our board of director doesn't necessarily do direct work and support unless it's something, maybe because we also run capacity building workshops. So if somebody on our board has an expertise in a particular topic or area and wants to facilitate that discussion with some of our trustee groups, then they could do that, but it wouldn't be for pay. They would just be doing that as part of, you know, their support of their board duties.
Okay, thank you, understand.
Mhm.
Thank you for that, Abdul. We now have a question from Munja.
Hello, Munjay here.
Mhm.
I have just been here Toronto 6 years and 5 years. The number of grant. This is rather than question or feedback, whatever I've been through. Luckily, I didn't have to choose a trusteeship since this year. Then this year, one of a grant that we applied, we approval. So one of our unison hub cannot be trustee because some have a financial whatever funding problem. So we had to choose another one, no so. And that trustees respond. I have a coordinate two of us. We planned the project. They respond initially. They said they don't know our organization. And then they don't know me. They know another person, so has to put another person's nonprofit name in it in order to get them trustee. I feel very kind of I earned enough respect, the trust since being outreach for community without paying anything. That is a trustee's attitude to me is really hurtful. I still couldn't get over. We needed her and me. I decided, I agreed because we need a trustee, but I still cannot get over their reaction. We don't know you well enough because other person they know. So you put your organization name on behalf. That's totally not acceptable. So I don't know why this is happening. Number two, trustee charge 10 to 15%. I'm from Manitoba. I never paid the trustee. They never asked me trustee for last 50 years. So 15% to me, I know a lot of workload, but to us, me like the residents, totally committed. So that the trustee 10% I can really understand acceptable. 15 is too much for little small micro grant. So that is my thing that I hope you do understand my feeling here.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, like we had said that trusteeship is really about a relationship. So some of the challenges that you had, you know, feeling disrespected and because they said they didn't know you or what have you. Unfortunately, those things happen. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be about, you know, building the relationship so that they get to know you and sitting down and talking to you and looking at your plan and being able to support your growth, right? Because that's really what the trusteeship is about. Supporting younger organizations to grow to a level where they are recognized everywhere, right? So, and most of the organizations that are taking on trusteeship, at some point, they were unknown too. So they had to grow and gain more knowledge of different places and get more connected to folks as well. So I'm sorry that was your experience with that organization, but that also helps you recognize that that's not a good fit, right? So based on that interaction, that lets you know that, you know what, that's not a good fit. Because if that's what the initial interaction was, who knows what it might be moving down the line, right? So it gives you an opportunity to continue to seek additional another trustee for your program. In terms of the financial costs, we recognize that, you know, it's challenging, especially for smaller smaller grants, and little micro grants and all of that. What we try to do is really identify what those costs go to. And we try to be as transparent as possible to kind of identify what that support looks like. Now, depending on the organization, they might have different frameworks of how they determine whether it's 10%, 15%, or what have you. That's again part of that relationship discussion in the beginning, right? Getting to know what their processes are and looking at the relationships that they also have with different funders. So in different funding capacities, maybe the funder pays that the administration fee for that project, especially with where micro grants might be involved. So it's really about having those open dialogues and conversations to find out how those components work as well. I hope that was helpful.
It's helpful, comforting, but I have to live with that because we have to decide on the trustees. So I have to walk through with it until next year. Another trustee, because they just transferring fund to us, I have to open up the community account in a bank, and then just issue one check, not entire workshop at all till next year. They took 8,000, so 800 right away issued one check. So this year, really, I'm agonizing this kind of transaction. Fee include, that's a big organization, but this time issued one check to me to put it in a community account, which I opened 2 weeks ago. Then $800 is to me residents unpaid forever. That's too much to digest.
And I think that's something that as trustee organizations, we kind of work to advocate for funders to be able to either pay that separately to the trustee group or to add that fee as an additional amount to whichever, for the grant amount that you requested, so that it doesn't take away from the amount that you requested to do your project. And that is something that a lot of trustee organizations are advocating towards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. I have a scenario maybe that you could provide some guidance around. So I heard back in the day, there was a group that was being trusteed, and they received a grant from a funder and basically required a trustee. It was a big grant. And they ran into a lot of issues with the trustee organization because they weren't releasing the funds according to the payment schedule. So they definitely had a schedule in place, but every time they requested the funds, they weren't coming within 10 business days, I think was the arrangement. And then it just escalated. There were a lot of problems, a lot of conflict, and they wanted to get out of the trusteeship relationship with this organization. But then the funder said that they would lose the grant if they left that trustee organization. So have you heard of situations like that where a funder can actually say, you know, you have to stay with this trustee the whole time with this grant? Or is there sometimes flexibility with that?
There is sometimes flexibility. It really depends on the funder and the funding stream that it's coming from, and sometimes too the duration of time. So if there's only a few more months left on that, it might not be pertinent to try to transfer it to another organization, as well as are there other grants that are with that organization as well. Is this one from a collection of grants that went to that organization? So it really depends on the funder. Hopefully, you know, and that's why I talked about really having that communication in the beginning around what it is that you are expecting, and really talking about how conflict gets addressed. And being able to have additional points of contact and to kind of mitigate things before they get to that point, and looking at, you know, what's really going on. And that's something too, you want to know that you have a trustee who's transparent, right? If there's some funding issues or what have you, letting them know. Sometimes too, part of the process of becoming a trustee is having the capacity for making sure that the financial pieces continue to run, because depending on the funder, they might give the money in chunks at different periods along the way, and sometimes the group may have spent all the funds from that first deposit that the funder had given, and may not have the capacity for the other pieces, and that might cause some of that problem. And so it's really important for even trustee organizations, even the shared platform, to be able to have that communication with the funder as well around their timeframes for delivering funds as well.
Thank you for that. That's actually a really important consideration, the actual capacity of the trustee organization, and just kind of talking through things like when will funds be released, how often, what's the process, and just like you said, talking that all through so you know what to expect.
And even asking that specific question around, if the funder for this project, if they only provide the money every 6 months, they provide chunks of it every 6 months. If we happen to go over, does the organization have the capacity to still retain, you know, paying staff and doing all of those components until the next check comes in? Or is that a conversation that we have to have with the funder ahead of time?
Very true, very true. And it's cash flow as well. Yeah. Sometimes organizations rely on that money coming in to be able to then spend it out. Other organizations might have some funding that they've accumulated that they can draw on as needed, even if they don't physically have the money in their hands. So those are really great considerations. So we have one last question from Abdul.
Yes, thank you very much. Especially related with the roles and responsibilities of the trustees. Is there any tools for conflict resolutions among the trustees? You know, in reality, when the trustees are long time over there and they don't have updated or latest information from the organization, or like from Revenue Canada or anything, it's very hard to convince them, to motivate them. Then many times organization becomes jeopardized. So is there any direct conflict resolutions for this kind of trustees tools?
Yeah, so in the guide, they have some information on conflict resolution that you can get support around that as well. A little self plug for the neighborhood group. We have a conflict resolution and training department within our organization that helps businesses work through workplace conflicts and relationship conflicts such as these. And our community mediation program, which is a free service, can help mediate pieces like that as well.
Thanks
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Natalie, I was really hoping that you would bring up that free conflict resolution. I didn't want to offer it. I was hoping that you would offer it. So thank you for that. And actually our organization, Social Planning Toronto, and some of the groups that we work with have worked with that conflict mediation program and had an amazing experience. The mediators are absolutely incredible. So I would highly encourage, if you're in that situation, to use that resource and support.
And Shahina, I can send you some information about that you can circulate to everyone afterwards as well.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for all that wealth of information. And we are really looking forward to when those resources are published and we can share it with everyone here today. But thank you so much for that. We really appreciate your time and expertise. And will you be with us until the end of the session?
Yes.
Amazing, amazing. So you're still here. If anyone thinks of other questions for Natalie, she's here. You can ask her in the chat or hang on to them until the end. But
All right,
now,
super.
thank you. Great. So I am going to now pass it over to our next presenter. I am just trying to figure out how to spotlight her. Our next presenter is Teshyla Bailey. She is the founder of Sis-to-Sis Toronto, and she's here today to share her perspective as a group that is not incorporated, that has had a trustee.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we could all see my slide deck.
Perfect. And while you're doing that, Teshyla is happy to answer questions throughout. Her approach is very much discussion and storytelling. So yeah, feel free if you have questions throughout her segment to ask away.
Definitely. Thanks, Shahina. So my name is Shyla Bailey. I'm the founder of Sis-to-Sis Toronto. We are a grassroots organization that prioritizes creating really cool programs and initiatives focused on personal development for Black and racialized young women. Predominantly, we serve in the North Etobicoke Rexdale area. And we started this organization back in 2019. If you're interested in seeing more about our work or some of the projects that we've launched, you can check us out on LinkedIn at Sis-to-Sis Toronto, as well as Instagram. Since 2019, we first started off as a really small collective of probably 3 starting members. A lot of the work that we started with was voluntary based. It wasn't until we actually got the Neighbourhood grant that we started our granting stream and was able to move on to get bigger grants. And that's also around the time that we started our trusteeship. Today's presentation, I'll just be exploring some of the highlights of our trusteeship, some of the things that we've gained through the partnership, as well as some of the things that you can look out for when deciding on a trustee of your own. These are just images from the past few years of our programs. You could see a lot of our participants, some of the highlights that we had pre-COVID, and then of course, when we transitioned onto a virtual platform, the top left corner shows some of our participants engaging over Zoom. So I'll be going over what to consider when deciding on a trustee, how your group can be protected, and what to gain from trusteeship. What to consider when deciding on a trustee. So the first thing that we were really mindful of was what values align between our grassroots group and the trustee that we chose. So something that we really prioritize is being a community-informed organization, being an organization that's community-led. And we're really big on fostering new partnerships and new opportunities within the community that we grew up in, because we recognize this as a really big need for our organization. So it was really important for us when we decided on a trustee, we wanted an organization that was not only Toronto-based, but was really grounded in community work as well. The other value that we prioritized was inclusion. Sorry, I'm just gonna make sure everybody's muted. So there's no backlash. Awesome. Inclusion was another value that we prioritized because we really wanted to make sure that the trustee that we were partnering with was inclusive the same way we were as a grassroots group. The other important value that we came to recognize, I would say probably in 2020, that was extremely helpful was resilience. Being a grassroots group when the pandemic hit was extremely hard in terms of us trying to navigate our next steps and do some contingency planning. So it was really important when we decided on a trustee that we found an organization that was also very innovative and very resilient in terms of their planning and execution when it came to their deliverables. The second thing that we were mindful of was the capacities trustees can support with. So I know a couple of the presenters already spoke on some of the administration skills that trustees support with. For us, we were really big on getting into a space that helped us with our leadership, as well as team building. Being a really small community group who didn't have a background in community work. We just saw a need for some of the things that were required for young women in our community. We really needed support with our leadership, and we're really looking forward to being a part of a trusteeship that allowed us to grow our capacities as leaders. I would say around that time too, in the ending of 2019, beginning of 2020, as we started to plan our next steps and really think about how we were going to grow as an organization, a lot of us experienced some imposter syndrome. We didn't think that we were going to be able to continue the work. A lot of us were doubting ourselves. And I think our trusteeship really provided us with not only a sense of confidence, but really provided us with opportunities to grow our skills as leaders, which was really helpful when the pandemic hit. Everything kind of was turned upside down. We weren't really sure where we were going to go or how we were going to move forward. And I think through the opportunities that we gained with our trusteeship, building those skills really allowed us to be prepared for the year ahead, the year and a half, I guess, of this pandemic. Team building was another great skill that we were able to learn from our trustee. That looked like us attending workshops on team building. Some of the workshops are centered around how conflict resolution, like Natalie mentioned, and all of those became very helpful because I would say we really strengthened our team bonding, as well as got a clear understanding for our strengths and weaknesses as a team, which really helped us plan our next steps moving forward. The third thing that I would tell you all to be mindful of too is who's in the space. Have knowledge of the staff, the stakeholders, and partners. This was extremely important for us later on, especially within the pandemic, because we wanted to get a clear understanding of other partnerships that our trustee could help us establish. Being aware of who the staff were on the trustee team was also very important because we wanted to make sure that we were in spaces that were reflective of us as a team and the community that we served. So we were really looking for a diverse staffing team. We were looking for a staff team that had women in leadership roles. Being a team that's woman-led, that was also really important for us. And we were also very mindful of the stakeholders that our trustee had as well. What that looked like was us going through the trustee websites, seeing what kind of partnerships they've established in the past, and seeing if the partnerships were people or organizations that also aligned with the values and missions that we had as a grassroots group. When it came to the partners of our trustee, this was really important because we were able to see what other potential partnerships we could hopefully gain from our trustee. And being that we were a smaller group, we knew that we needed partnerships in order to grow and help sustain a lot of our programming and projects. How your group can be protected. I think that both speakers earlier mentioned understanding your trustee agreement. So making sure that you're looking over your contract, finding others to support who may have a bit more clarity and a bit more understanding of how this process goes down. In the beginning, when we started off with just the neighborhood grant, the only person that we were really familiar with was Shahina. And that was the first person that I ran to when we were considering which trustee partnerships to move forward with. So having that extra person, whether it's a community leader or another representative from an additional organization, be that person to give your your trustee agreement a second look, can be very helpful because they might be aware of things that you may miss as a grassroots group. You also want to make sure that you're communicating your needs in advance. This is really important so that way you're able to get a clear understanding if this trustee is able to meet your needs, as well as have the capacity. I know that Natalie mentioned that at the very beginning. One thing that we were a little thrown off by was the number of trusteeships that our trustee had. In the very beginning, we were really hesitant because we weren't sure if we were gonna get enough attention, enough support. And that was something that we were really clear about and communicated. And after hearing about our trustees' plan in terms of how they support each group and a lot of the staffing that they have on board to help meet our needs, we felt more comfortable moving forward. You also want to make sure that you're having ongoing communication with your points of contacts to make sure needs and requirements are being met or explored. So this is a very broad statement, but I would say the number one area that you could look at, I know Shereen mentioned checking in with your reports, checking in with your finances. For us, we have a organizational mentor who's a part of our trustee. That's our main point of contact, as well as a grant manager who is like our middle person when it comes to our actual funding. So we make sure to schedule meetings, if not monthly, then every other month, to just make sure that we're aligned with our project deliverables, as well as aligned with our budget. This helps us in the long term because when we're reaching that year-end point, there's no surprises or things that we're thrown off by, because we're keeping track of our progress as a team and in terms of our projects on an ongoing basis instead of waiting till the very end. I think that's also very helpful because I feel like our trustees have a really good idea of who we are as individuals and as a team, as well as our grant manager. So when other opportunities come up or there's other things that they think that we may align with, I think that we're on the top of the list to hopefully get that communication and hear about those additional opportunities as well. And I think it was Shahina that mentioned, or Shereen spoke on the importance of having personal relationships with the people within these spaces. This is how you're able to get these connections to go a lot further than just your existing project or your existing partnership. I told you all in the beginning that Shahina was very helpful with our process of deciding on a trustee. And I think a lot of that came from her understanding what we did as a group and what we did as individual team members to be able to suggest or make comments around what we could do in regards to our trustee agreement. So what we've gained through our trustee. So I mentioned we talked a lot about our team building in the very beginning, our conflict resolution. This all aligned with our capacity building as a team. Being a small grassroots group, we kind of came into funding at the start of the pandemic, not really feeling well equipped to manage it. We were confident that we had a great project and a great plan, but when everything, when push came to shove, I would say, with the pandemic, we were really feeling insecure about how we were actually going to do the work. And that's when our trustee came in to provide awesome training opportunities. If it wasn't from the internal staff within our trustee organization, they looked for external support to help us in the areas of public speaking, workshop facilitation. That's where I learned how to navigate Zoom and do things virtually and even run programs and projects over virtual platforms, as well as I would say conflict resolution was also a big one. We learned how to do grant writing, which supported us with additional funding opportunities. We learned how to strategically plan, which is like a new area that we're tapping into now that we're reaching the 2-year mark of one of our existing funding streams. These were all very beneficial skills for us, not only as a team, but as individuals who really pride ourselves in being community leaders and community advocates. Our trusteeship also provided us with mentorship opportunities. I told you all that we have an organization mentor. So this is our main point of contact throughout our grant span. This is somebody that we get to communicate with whenever we need it. We could just request meetings and really get to explore anything from personal challenges or larger project issues that we run into. Another bonus of having a trustee is that we have a charity number. So we are able to accept donations through them. We wouldn't be able to do that as a grassroots organization because we are not registered as a nonprofit. And credibility. I know Shereen spoke a lot about how important this could be. For us, our credibility really came from our reputation as a grassroots organization. I told you all in the beginning of the pandemic, we were really, really insecure in terms of how we were going to lead and show up in spaces. And now I would say going into 2022, we've established a pretty solid team and a pretty solid set of programming from the help of our trusteeship that allowed us to create further opportunities throughout the community, further partnerships with a lot of larger corporations as well as businesses, and gain further funding stream as well. And just having that support, or just even having our trusteeship logo on our website has been an extremely big push, because when we apply for other granting bodies or tell other businesses about who we are, the credibility of our trustee also stands for our credibility as well.
Amazing.
And that's, thanks, Shahina. That's all my notes for today. If you have any other questions or follow-ups, I know we're gonna have a bit of a Q&A session now, I think for the next 5-ish minutes. But if we run out of time for whatever reason, definitely stay in touch. I'm on LinkedIn as well as Instagram, and my email's there at the bottom.
Thank you so much, Teshyla. I'm so sorry that I interjected there when you weren't fully complete. But thank you very much. It's so helpful to have your insight and your perspective as a group that's actually undergoing trusteeship. I think it's really invaluable, some of the considerations that you shared, even talking about capacity building, right? Like it's something that you don't always think that you need, and not all trustee organizations can provide. It depends on their capacity, but that's something that I know from speaking to a lot of groups that say that that's really been critical for them because they want to be able to grow and continue. And other groups I know are just looking for that sort of one-time trustee relationship to just get a grant and then move on and do different kinds of work. So all to say, it's really interesting the considerations that you raised from that very different perspective of being trustee. So thank you for that. And thank you for your kind words earlier. You've got lots of support in the chat here. Leah is asking, what kinds of questions did you ask to make the decision of getting to know your trustee? Do you have a checklist or a questionnaire template you can share?
Ooh, this is so cool. Maybe what I could do is I'll share some important questions that you should ask with Shahina after the presentation. When it came to this specific trustee that we have right now, I did what Natalie told you all not to do, which was scramble at the very last minute to grab a trustee. We had a large funding opportunity coming up, and I told you all that Shahina was my only source of insight around this funding body. The grant suggested our trustee, but I wasn't sure if we should move forward with them. And then after having a conversation with Shahina, who was familiar with them, that's how we made our decision. So we completely went over that hump of asking deeper questions, which we should have did. Luckily, our partnership has been beautiful nonetheless, and we've gained a lot of support. But I would, looking back, I think some important questions would be, what kind of projects do they currently support? That was one thing that we kind of checked out. We've seen that they had a few other woman-led organizations, which was a big plus for us. We saw the diversity on the team, which was also a big plus. We didn't stop to ask those questions, but those were the quick things that I checked for, just kind of grazing through their social media platforms and their website, which made me feel a lot more secure. So I would definitely say finding out what types of projects they've supported in the past or supported currently, who is on their staffing team in terms of what backgrounds they come with. I think the really cool thing about our trustee is that a lot of the members have been doing community work for 10 plus years. That was something that we learned a little later on, but it definitely is a bonus for us because they're also able to provide mentorship in spaces outside of our existing project. But I will make a formal list and send that to Shahina so that way it's a bit more concise. You're welcome, Leah.
Thank you so much. And thanks for offering to develop that list. I think that would be really helpful for everyone. So thanks for offering that. And Teshyla is very humble. She also didn't mention that she started to put together a list of trustees, potential trustees for all of you, just anticipating that some of you coming to the session today might be looking for a trustee. So she's already sent me a list by email that I will share with all of you after the session as well. So thank you so much for that, Teshyla. That's invaluable.
You're welcome. I'm just gonna make a note of it. It's a list of questions.
Great. So we do have, when you're ready, we do have a question from Abdul.
Awesome.
Hi, this is actually a very excellent presentation with respect to trusteeship and the roles and responsibilities. What I understand, definitely communication and relationship are vital for this kind of activities. However, I have a very small quick question that, is the trusteeship is a permanent position or renewable?
A trusteeship in what, sorry?
Is it permanent?
Oh, permanent. Oh, so our trusteeship lasts the scope of our grant. So the bigger grant that we got in 2020 is until 2022. So we signed on a contract with our current trustee for that specific grant. However, you can have multiple, I don't even know our contract, I should double check that. But for certain funding streams, you are allowed to have different trustees for different funding. So if there was another larger grant that we are applying to, we don't have to stick to our existing trustee. We could go out and find an external support.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, very important.
Great, thank you. Just catching up on the chat here. Thanks for being here, Leah. We have about 3 more minutes, and then we're going to do a raffle for 2 gift cards for all of you amazing participants today. I did want to I was scrolling back up into the chat to see some of the earlier comments, and I know that Leah had sent an interesting article advocating for more grassroots funding without having to go through the hoops of getting a trustee. So more funding to come out and go directly into the hands of resident leaders and grassroots groups. So kind of the opposite of what we're talking about here today, but a really, really important kind of discussion that's happening in the sector, and a big movement that's starting to happen in the sector right now towards how do we get funding into the hands of people directly, but also have good trusteeships in place for those groups who really want to explore trusteeship for all the different reasons that we heard here today. Right, so are there any other questions? Oh, yes, we do. Fiorella, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, some of you or some of the presenters mentioned, receiving legal support to go through like documents even before you enter your trusteeship. I'm wondering if anybody has any recos on, lawyers or legal programs that help specifically grassroots communities. Would love to get some recos on that.
That's a really, really good question. Does anyone here today have some suggestions or resources to share around legal supports for grassroots groups? I know that back in the day, I had accessed supports from a lawyer for free. I was only able to get 10 hours because you know how much lawyers charge per hour. That was about all that they were willing to give us, it's actually a lot. It was a free lawyer service. It's gonna come back to me. It's not coming back to me right now, but it will. So I can definitely send out a link to that free lawyer service for nonprofits. I will include the link in the email with all the resources after today's session, so probably tomorrow. And then there's another organization that provides free consultants. So it's not necessarily lawyers that you can access for free, but they have consultants, and the consultants can help you in different areas like strategic planning. Oh, thank you. That's the one, Mass Consulting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's the free consulting service. I swear our minds are connected to Shyla.
That's a good thing. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's it.